The next speaker is Mr. Glover with ZyVersa Therapeutics.
Thank you. Everyone get enough coffee to talk some science? Well, great. So just by a show of hands, I just want to get a feel for how many of you are have been invested in the biotech space. Great. How many of you made money in the biotech space lately? I didn't want to bring up a bad subject, but it's a unique market, as we know right now. So I'm happy to be here to give you guys an update on the company. I don't know if you guys saw that poster on the way up where the guy's mind reading. I think I may need that, to get through here. If you got some questions at the end, we'll certainly go through it. So, how many people are familiar with ZyVersa in the room? I know you are. Okay, great. So a little background here on the company. So we went public in December. Yes, we were brave enough to actually take the leap and go out and become a public company in December of this year. We did that through a reverse merger into an entity, and we're traded on the NASDAQ. So you'll hear a lot of my comments around kind of the forward-looking statements and what we're looking to do. If I can get this to change. Yeah. So a little bit about our team. One of the things, for those of you who don't know me, I've been in the industry for about 40 years. So this is my third company I took public. A couple of others are on the NASDAQ, trading over $1.5 billion to $2 billion. I'm not a good retired person. That's very clear. And I was very excited to actually form this company about 7 years ago. And this company really is focused on a group of people that I've worked with for over 20 years. Just to give you some context for those of you who may not be familiar with how you do this, you find really smarter people than you are. You continue to work with them for 20 years, and then you end up at the bottom here with the ability to show that you've had 35 NDAs and INDs filed, and you've brought products to market in over 55, over 40 years. So it's a team that's really sophisticated, really good at what they do. We've got really good 2 scientific advisory boards, some top-notch research scientists that are on these 2 programs as well. And what I like to do when I build a board, because I'm chairman of an immuno-oncology company as well on the public market, I like to build it with CEOs. So my board is actually built out entirely of CEOs, people that have managed, taken companies into the public market, understand the trials and tribulations of doing that. So here's the quick view. We are targeting a $75 billion total available market, broken into 2 programs. The first program is our lead program, which is entering phase 2. It's in the renal disease area. To give you context, we've all been through pandemic talk a lot last couple of years. Diabetic kidney disease and renal diseases are about 18% of the spend in the Medicare budget. And until 2 weeks ago, nothing had been proved since I was at Amgen 25 years ago. And that's a really sad statistic when you think about it, because it's a major problem. And in these diseases, up on the top right, FSGS and Alports, those are orphan diseases. You basically diagnose with those diseases, you progress into dialysis, and then you end up in kidney transplant. Diabetic kidney disease is an offshoot of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and just a major, major problem. So that's about $13 billion of the opportunity which we're going after, and we're just starting our human trials in the latter part of this year in phase 2. The second program is in an area that ever so often in biotech, you see a new target that becomes very, very hot. And this goes back to my days at Amgen and Roche, where we were looking at inflammation. And I don't know if everybody's seen all the recent news on inflammation, but in general, out of control inflammation is one of the major drivers of disease and morbidity in the United States. And This area has exploded in the last few years around TNF inhibitors. The two largest selling drugs in the world are Enbrel and Humira. And if you take a look at those two products and then look at the activities that's taken place in the inflammation space lately, it's all around an area called TYK2 inhibitors or inflammasomes. Now, to give you context of why I just want to give you guys context of this. Did anybody see the Merck Prometheus deal last week? It's an $11 billion deal on a phase 2 asset for a TKY2 inhibitor for one indication. That's the kind of things that we're talking about here. Now, our product is targeting an area called the inflammasome. And the way to think about an inflammasome is on the innate immunity side. When you get a viral infection or a bacterial infection for the first time, your host body, your immune system, does not recognize that issue, right? It doesn't know what to do. Similar but not identical what happens with COVID, when we weren't prepared in our immune systems to deal with that. And the first thing that gets formed in your body when that happens on your innate immune system is a thing called an inflammasome. And that inflammasome, left unblocked, generates two cytokines, IL-1 beta and IL-18. These two cytokines are very problematic in a host of diseases. So, for example, our furthest along here in our preclinical work is in acute respiratory distress syndrome. This is if you get a sepsis or an infection in the hospital, you get intubated in an ICU, your inflammation kicks off, is driven by an inflammasome cascade. And if left unblocked, obviously you run into problems. And that's where you get a lot of mortality. Now, that's an orphan disease indication of which we're ready to start into phase go and get our IND open on. The second one related to that is multiple sclerosis. I've been in the MS market off and on for 30 years. Multiple sclerosis is one of the most studied disease areas. A lot of research and development being done in here. It's a $25 billion market alone. However, when you decompose the recent literature and find out inflammasome activation around IL-1 beta on the myelin sheath is causing a major, major problem here in this disease. And we're focused in on that, and we've completed our preclinical work on that area as well. Parkinson's. We're proud to have announced about 3 months ago a relationship with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. That is the leading Parkinson's foundation in the world. And I don't know if you watched last week, but there was a major announcement out of that foundation related to a new biomarker related to a really important misfolding of a protein, alpha-synuclein. Now we understand what we're targeting. So about 6 months ago, we did this relationship with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and the University of Miami, and our monoclonal antibody is actually targeting that same target. So we've got some really good initial data and preclinical there as well. One of the most important areas is this new developments in Alzheimer's disease. So we now have seen this issue of tau formation and plaque and all that work that's been done for 2 decades. At the JPM conference, there is a neural conference right before that. And at that conference, it was announced that inflammasome activation, particularly high levels of ASC, which is a protein component of an inflammasome, actually is an early stage inflammation part of Alzheimer's. We just recently published a series of preclinical publications around our effectiveness in our preclinical models around Alzheimer's disease. So those are the 4 models in the work that we're currently working on. We're looking to expand that work over the year, which is one of the reasons we went public, into IgA nephropathy, which is an orphan disease related to kidney disease. I don't know if you follow Travere. Travere was one of the companies that just got approval for IgA nephropathy. It's a $1.5 billion company. We're looking at Huntington's disease, and we're beginning to look at congestive heart failure. So that's about a $60 billion opportunity just on those areas that we're researching. To give you context, there are over 70 diseases that are known now associated with inflammasome activation. This is how much of a major problem your immune system could be if left unblocked and you don't block IL-1 beta or IL-18. So where do we go here? It's a lot. I'm not going to kid you. It's a lot to focus and make sure you're doing the right things to move ahead. We've been cleared by the FDA on our first program, and we'll be initiating the human experience and trials of that. It's going to be an open label trial. We're going to initiate that towards the end of this year. We've got the sites identified. We're doing the protocols. We're ready to do this. It's going to be open label, so we'll be able to see data on this early 2024, late 23, and the first half of 2024. We only have a couple places to go here on our inflammasome program. We've been working on this now for 5 years. We are just in the end stage of our preclinical work. And we need to complete only GLP toxicology in monkeys and rodents to move that next step. Now, that's about a $5 million study, so it's not an inexpensive study. And one of the things you learn from the pandemic is I wish I was a monkey provider back during the pandemic, because the prices of monkeys have tripled. It's amazing. But that is important because we have completed the scale up of our monoclonal antibody up to 2,000 liters already. So that's about a $5 million expenditure is completed. We've got GMP material that allows us to do our toxicology study, and we've got phase 1 material. So a lot has been done here to get to this stage so that we can, towards the end of the year, at the completion of our GLP toxicology study, meet with the FDA and file for an open IND and move into phase 1. Now, I'm going to give you some deeper context of this in a moment, but in general, there's been about $5 billion worth of M&A and licensing that's taken place right at that transition stage from preclinical into phase 1. This has been done by companies such as BMS, Merck, Roche, and several others, which I'll talk about in a moment. The reason that's happening is because you can build a pipeline and a product off of something like this. And Big Pharma, you know, I used to be a portfolio manager for Roche years ago. Big Pharma looks for these opportunities, which is why you've got so many dollars that are going into these marketplaces. So just a little bit of drill down here to give you context. I won't go too much into the science here today, but this is important. This is breaking science that we're doing here. You guys are probably familiar with NASH, fatty liver disease. Well, you got to think about kidney disease as fatty kidney disease, because what's happening here is you have cholesterols and lipids that are around this structure called a podocyte. And this podocyte sits on the top of the kidney. And if you leave that podocyte intact, as you'll see over here on the right-hand side, your membrane stays in place. So you don't get protein leak, and you don't get a nephrotic syndrome, and you don't have a decrease in your kidney filtration rate. But what happens in these diseases is lipids accumulate around this podocyte. It then forces it to detach over time from the basement membrane. And when that happens, you get protein leakage into the urine, and you get nephrotic syndrome. And that is your pathway to dialysis and your pathway to transplant. Our work has been all around this proposition of slowing or eliminating lipids and cholesterol that are in these cells with our product called VAR200. And then by doing that, you keep the basement membrane and the podocyte attached. So it's a really important program. The phase early work was excellent. The FDA cleared us to go into phase 2, and now we're going to be doing that this year. Just to give you an idea, this is that $13 billion market I was talking about. The standard treatment today on the left-hand side is ACEs and ARBs. This is what Travere got approved on, is an ACE and ARB combination. They're about $1.5 billion company. On the right-hand side is the inflammation component of the disease. That's where steroids and high-dose steroids are used, or calcineurin inhibitors. What we're focused on is this lipid accumulation piece. And you'll be using this in combination because you're trying to reduce the inflammation, you're trying to manage hypertension, and now by adding this, you're trying to slow the detachment of the podocytes. Okay? So in our work, in preclinical work, astounding, honestly, we did 4 different animal models, 3 different diseases. And in every one of those at doses across the board, we reduced renal cholesterol, we protected against renal injury and fibrosis or death, and we were able to demonstrate in both genetic and non-genetic models the reduction of protein in the animals. We took that data to the FDA and obviously moved forward here. So what we're going to do in our phase 2 open label trial is very simple. We're going to administer the drug twice a week. It's going to be by IV infusion at this point to get proof of concept. And we're going to be measuring baseline changes from renal function, from when the patient starts on therapy, to the reduction of protein, and see if there's any increase in eGFR. Those are the same 2 endpoints of which you get approval for by the FDA in your phase 3 trial. Just to give you some context, as I mentioned earlier, I'm an investor, I'm an LP. This is the deals that have been done. So this is a hot space. And so if you look at the deals that have been done and when they're being done, they're looking at the phase 2 readouts, moving into phase 3. You're seeing biobuck deals being done here. And right now, we're the only company in phase 2 with this cholesterol lowering approach. So from this market perspective, as I mentioned earlier, this is about a $13 billion market. It's got a mix of orphan and non-orphan indications. We're unique in the way we are positioned here and our mechanisms of action, and we've been able to clear the FDA to go into phase 2. We're going to do this in 3 different diseases, and we'll pick the findings from the open label trial and move into 1 indication to move forward. This is the second program. I'll be a little bit briefer here because I want to leave time for some questions. This inflammasome space is really fascinating. It is a major biotech target. I'm guessing, I saw this 7 years ago when I sit on the innovation board at the University of Miami School of Medicine. 7 years ago, I saw this thing called an inflammasome, and I saw some early data on it, and it was fascinating to me. Because this is what happens in big pharma and big targets. In 2002, this thing called inflammasome was identified, and there were about 3 publications. And the inventors of the technology we licensed were actually on one of those 3 publications. That's how long they've been studying this. There are now 20,000 publications out on this. You go and Google inflammasomes, and you need to get some sleep, you can do it by just reading this stuff. And that is fascinating because what's happened as this knowledge has expanded, we now understand how broad this inflammasome problem is. As a matter of fact, on the right-hand side, I kind of talked about this briefly earlier. There are now over 70 indications or diseases, anything from cancer to Alzheimer's disease to type 1 and type 2 diabetes that have inflammasome activation as a major problem. The other learnings have been is that it's not just one inflammasome now. And I'm going to highlight that in a second. The first inflammasome identified was called NLRP3. You got to name it some way. And that's what they did. Now, through this literature on the left-hand side, there are over 12 known inflammasomes. And we now know it's not only the initiation of the cellular event, but also the perpetuation of a structure called the ASC spec. That is a problem. So here's a cartoon. Immunology in 1 minute. All right? No test, no pretest, post-test, don't worry. On the upper left-hand cartoon is what I was referring to as an inflammasome. Remember, you get this virus or you get this bacteria, this little sensor molecule gets activated. When that activation takes place, it attracts a protein aggregation called NLR-ASK and is taken up by the NLR3 sensor. When that happens and it attaches caspase 1, that's what an inflammasome is. And left unblocked, it does 2 things on the right-hand side. It forms within the cell. It then dies in the cell, releases into the tissues and fluids, and it perpetuates inflammation through two cytokines, as I mentioned, IL-1 beta and IL-18. So we were the first company out there, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go public. We're the first company that actually targets the ASC component, the red component, and in addition to that, we work both in the cell and on the death of the cell where the ASC spec is. Now, why that's important is that's why we're a monoclonal antibody and everybody else is a small molecule. The last piece here is really important to understand is that diseases such as MS and everything, it's not just one target. It is multiple targets, and that's what the literature is showing us. So what does all this mean? We got proof of concept in our preclinical work on how this works. There's a lot of published literature we've put out there about how this works. In addition to that, it's a $65 billion opportunity, multiple indication sets, and it costs about $250,000 per indication in preclinical to determine whether you're effective or not in animals. We've already got our method of composition issued, and so we have a long patent life, and we've already got good safety data. But what's important to you as a potential investor is this slide. You don't see this very often in this industry. Preclinical, small molecules, inflammasome inhibitors have been acquired by 7 of the top 12 companies already. And the average deal up front at preclinical going into phase 1 is about $300 to $400 million in upfronts and about $1 billion in backside. So it's a unique opportunity. It's a unique environment. And I thank you for spending a little time, hopefully not too much science, but I wanted to see if you guys had any questions. Who's the brave one in the room? Go ahead. Great question. So one of the things we want to do is we have our initial formula, which is IV. We've already been working through a drug-device combination for point of care. So think of it as kind of like an insulin market, and that you would attach this, deliver it to your body, throw it away at that point. So it's a point of use delivery system. Great. Sure. So you got that same gene I've got, huh? Yeah, so we focus. I mean, so we're lucky in that the team's very experienced. Secondly, we focused in on 3 to 4 key indications. We're not going to take all those forward. We'll choose one after our phase 1 and bring that one forward. But from a strategic collaboration perspective, I've had conversations about what indications other people might be interested in, and we're doing the animal models just to show proof of concept in that stage. Great question. Thank you. Great. Thank you. The post-test is just outside on the immunology side if you guys want to take it. Have a good day. Have a good conference.